people talk about normality. Can't we go back to normal? I don't want to go back there at all, right? We've lost that. So if we don't pay the true cost for meat and meat processing on a local basis, or the farmer, we all know what that looks like. It's a Hot Pocket and a L'Eggo My Eggo in a microwave. That's what it's going to be.
COVID really kind of broke the camel's back when it comes to our food supply. That's when I think a lot of people sat back and said, this system doesn't work. We cannot have a system, a globalized, corporate structured system, and have food security at the same time. It just doesn't work. Big Ag does play a significant role in offering affordable options to a lot of people. But when it comes down to it, is it food security? No, it is food insecurity. And that's what we recognized when COVID hit, supply chains got disrupted, and we're seeing it even today with supply chain disruptions and everything going, large crop disruptions, and what's happening with our food supply chain and why prices are so high at the grocery store these days. One of the big hurdles and one of the reasons why 4 companies control 80% of the meat packaging industry has to do with regulation. The governments believe that it is their duty to make sure that everything that we eat is safe for us to consume. And granted, a lot of people don't have the knowledge base to understand what is safe, what isn't safe, how to check something, so they kind of rely on the government to do that. And so as a result, you have this oversight of how meat is processed. It takes a lot to take an animal from the field and turn it into a burger patty or a steak. It takes a significant amount. It's not something you probably heard of farmers all over the U.S. during the meat shortages saying that they had no way of getting the meat from the field to your table. And so this is a very important topic, and being able to return any portion of that market share that 4 companies control 80% of back to the community farmer, the small rancher, the regenerative farmer. In order to be able to do that, we have to have a way of either reducing regulation or offering ways that that smaller producers, people who are interested in opening meat processing facilities, can navigate those regulations to be able to open their doors and safely provide meat to the consumer. But I know a few guys in the meat industry, one in particular, Dave Carter. He joined with Chris Roper going to an institute called the Flower Hill Institute. Flower Hill Institute typically serves the Native American community when it comes to STEM programs, teaching about agriculture, promoting agriculture, helping Native people have food security. But the Flower Hill Institute is now is also offering a new program. It's a technical assistance program within the meat industry to help small mom and pop shops or large manufacturing facilities open up and help restore some confidence and some opportunities to our meat food supplies. Anyway, I thought it would be interesting to get Roger Fragua on the phone. Roger is the executive director of the Flower Hill Institute, and just kind of talk a little bit about this program, but also about what's happening in the meat industry in general, our food climate, and what would happen if we lost some of these small farmers. So I'm going to share that conversation with you guys. I have a couple conversations with Roger that I'll share with you guys in the coming days, weeks, whenever I can get them aired. But I hope you listen to what he has to say, and please share this video, help get the word out. I don't think that enough people understand the importance of relocalizing our food system. The Flower Hill Institute, what is it that the Flower Hill does?
Well, Flower Hill Institute was actually inspired by a cultural leader, a traditional healer. He and I were on a cultural retreat together several years ago, and we were talking about some of the challenges we have in our tribal communities. Suicide sometimes with our youth is an epidemic, depending on which community you're talking about at that particular time. And so there was just a lot of stress and challenges and pressure with our youth. And I think our youth we probably share much in common with mainstream America. And he said, in a very challenging way to us, to himself and to myself, I don't want to talk about this anymore unless we're going to do something about it. And so, Charlie, thanks for understanding that my subconscious is much stronger than my conscious. And I went to sleep that night, and I woke up about 5 in the morning, and I texted him, and I said, Flower Hill Institute. And he said, "What's that?" And I said, "That's the name of our not-for-profit." He said, "We don't have a not-for-profit." I said, "Not yet, we don't, but we're going to build one." And in response to his challenge, and Flower Hill Institute really is concerning itself around cultural preservation, youth indigenous knowledge, STEM camps. They're like day camps, and then climate resiliency and agriculture. And those are the four pillars. Our board of directors, the most amazing thing about Flower Hill Institute, they're all formally elected tribal leaders. They all have not sat on but led a national Indian organization, and they currently are working with tribes on a regional intertribal basis. And that's the native board of director. And then our executive committee is just amazing. They're kind of the who's who here in the Southwest of economic development, youth development, entrepreneurial development, and just really solid people. So we combine those two together, and you've got Flower Hill Institute. And what we do is we serve Indian country as a legal term of art. Indian country is the 577 federally recognized American Indian tribes, and there's about 40 or 50 state recognized tribes, and there's a few unrecognized tribes in there that constitute Indian country. And Indian country is those tribes geographically spread across 33 states. It's 4 million Indian people growing 4% per year. And I know 4% doesn't sound like a very large number, but it's doubling our population every 18 to 20 years. We're the fastest sector of the U.S. population by race. And at one point, we were called the Vanishing American, or that little nursery rhyme where you talk about one little, two little, three little Indians, four little. That song ends with no little Indian boys. I think there was a time in American history where there were not going to be no little Indian boys, and now we're the fastest sector of the U.S. population by race. So things have changed in our community. And we have 53 million acres. We've got senior water rights and bioregions. And, I think we make up 90% of America's diversity, not just in terms of our language, food, song, dance, customs, traditions, but also our governance. And I think that when you think about Indian country as a very dynamic place, that most people, I think, in America relegate the American Indian to beads and feathers on a postcard or some Western film, or we're the new rich with the $30 billion of money coming in through casinos. I think most of Indian country is neither one of those things. But that's who we serve, is we serve Indian country.
Right now, you guys are also working on doing technical assistance for new meat processing facilities through the American Rescue Plan, and that extends beyond Indian country, correct? That's
well beyond Indian country. My cell phone rings with academia, state offices, and mom and pop, smaller disadvantaged community representatives that are from all walks of life and from all across America. And we're very honored and happy to serve them in the same way that we're deeply committed to serving Indian country. And it's really all about, we're all so connected on this landscape. And I think we have more in common than we have in difference. And we're so honored and happy to serve, these United States and this administration as the technical hub for meat processing.
When we talk about meat processing and independent meat processors, why do you think that that's such an important topic right now for Americans in general?
I'm not so sure that we can kind of lay it all on the back of COVID, but I think COVID really did uncover and it brought out the best in us as Americans. And I think in some cases it brought out the worst in us as Americans. And I think when you look at some of the supply chain issues that were underneath a very thin veneer of, what we thought was, kind of people talk about normality, can't we go back to normal? I think when we think truly about going back to normal, I think there's half of me that says, I don't want to go back there at all. I think we really do need to shore up and, get past some of the veneer that COVID had exposed all across America. And, I think meat processing, like the energy sector, we talk about this national grid, and it takes one tree branch in Idaho or Utah, and all of a sudden the entire grid is knocked out for the entire West during some kind of a storm or an incident like that. And I think the same thing with meat processing. It's really exposed the need for more local more regional approaches to food security, not just in meat processing, but I think in food in general. And I think our grandparents, kind of going back to the future, I think most of our grandparents had it right. They were able to get through many different challenges because they shared with their neighbors, and they were kind of working very closely with folks within their own region, if you will. And I think that we need to kind of go back to that future and really start thinking about it that way. And that's not the international trend by these very large, kind of monolithic corporations. And nothing wrong with corporations, that's not it for me. I mean, that's not the fight I'm willing to take on. But I think I'm not against that. I'm really for Westerners working together with Westerners, and really securing kind of what our grandparents had, which was regional approach and sharing knowledge and sharing food and sharing land, sharing water, and those kinds of things. I think that's where the future ought to be. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, when you're talking about kind of the large meat processors, I think to an extent, I mean, food security is important for all people, and they make that food available for a lot of people. But I feel like with the larger corporations controlling 80% of the market, it's become pretty exclusive. And I know for us, and a lot of folks that I run into, small farmers in general, getting an animal from the field to the table is a lot trickier than what I'm sure a lot of people imagine, especially when it comes to providing that to others. We have to, for example, horned animals where we are, there's no processor that will take them, so we have to find somebody who can do a field harvest. Do you think that this program is going to help open up the market to some of those smaller producers who are trying to supply things locally?
Yes, absolutely, no question. That is the part of the goal and part of the benefit for doing this kind of work. That's one of the elements that we really work hard to try and help the smaller disadvantaged processor to become more successful. That is part of the goal for sure.
When it comes to technical assistance, can you explain how that side of the program works?
Not really, because there's not a simple or a short answer to that, because the needs by these small processors are so diverse. It's incredible. Some are really strong in certain areas, and others are more challenged in other areas. So you don't know when the phone rings and when that request for technical assistance, when it comes in, what it's going to entail. And what we try and do is, as a really good concierge, try and bring that processor, that challenge, that question to the right source. So when you look at the technical assistance for meat processors, and you think about the United States Department of Agriculture and the resource behind that, that's not really where the rubber meets the road. It's not at Flower Hill Institute, even though we've got great resources. We truly do, some of the best in the country, through Dave Carter and Chris Roper and some of their colleagues. But they're really, it's a large group effort. And there's university types, there's Indian Ag Council. There's just a lot of diversity that goes into trying to solve and answer the questions from the clientele, who really is striving to try and add to the supply chain, strengthening the supply chain, and adding to the diversity, and really adding to the regionalization of food systems to make us more secure. So it's not like there's the usual frequently asked questions, even though we have that on the website. We get calls that are very, very diverse, and try and help them, the folks that are really kind of boots on the ground, apron in the kitchen, so to speak. Those folks are really trying to solve problems, and we try and help them do that. And oftentimes we're challenged and stumped, and we said, we don't know the answer, but we'll get right back to you. And we have to go get more people to really help us think that thing through. So yeah, we're very honored to do that work, and we're challenged to do that work, but we really are deeply committed and try very hard to problem solve.
One of the questions that I've always had is with meat processing, when you're dealing with the smaller operations, the mom and pop operations, or just regional facilities that they're not pumping through thousands of animals a day. Maybe it's a couple hundred animals, maybe it's less than that.
Yeah, it could be much less than that, actually.
Yeah. Is there have you seen any movement on policy and regulation that would make it easier? Because, a facility processing thousands of animals is going to have much higher safety requirements in my mind than somebody who's processing a few animals a day. So do you think that there's any type of avenue for policy to ease up on some of those smaller ones, or do you feel like a lot of the policies that are in place are uh, serve a purpose?
Well, I think the policies do serve a purpose, and I think that we're going to get to identifying what are the questions, what are the challenges with smaller operators, and I think that it's an issue that we're dealing with in real time. So we're trying to figure out what are the questions, what are the problems, and what are the answers, and we're all in that together. So we're going to need policymakers to be nimble and flexible as the market is to respond to food security and supply chain issues. So I think that we've got some really good folks in the United States Department of Agriculture, and we've got good folks, I think, in Congress and in other places of influence and decision making. And I think we're all in this together. It's going to take some time, I think, but I think when we all figure out that we're all going to have to become more nimble to go back to the future, I think that will happen. I'm very confident and hopeful that that's going to happen. Yeah, and we've got a very big network. We did the Osage meat processing plant, USDA certified in 7 months.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah,
Chris Roper worked on that one, right?
He did. Yeah. He was part of our team.
That's pretty impressive to turn around a facility in 7 months.
It's incredibly impressive. I told Chief Standing Bear when he asked me to do the work, I said, I can't do that. I said, and if anybody tells you they can, they're lying to you. So don't, believe me, I can't do it. And don't believe them when they tell you they can do it. Nobody can do that.
Yeah.
And he said, no, we really need to get this done. It's part of our food security. It's COVID money. We've got a December 30th deadline to spend this money. And we can't, it's not like golf, like you can get close. It's like we've got to do it. We can't get close. There's no way it's going to happen, especially with COVID, people not working and people isolated and supply chain issues. It's just not going to happen. And he said, well, I want you to try it. And I said, I'll try it if you give me a hall pass and I'm telling you right now, it can't be done. And if you don't hold it against me for not being able to do it, because it's my reputation, because in Indian country, I get stuff done. And if you're willing to give me a hall pass to say, I told you so, and don't hold it against me. He said, no, I'll work with you. And when he said, I'll work with you, when a chief works with you, it's going to happen. It happened. I mean, it was amazing. And believe me, it was not us. It was not us who did that. It was the tribe who did it. We helped facilitate it happening. And the tribe and its leaders and its people, their program directors. I mean, we did a side by side, a companion pre-audit justification with their legal team while we were doing the work. So when the audits come, and they're coming, when the audits come for the COVID money, that we have a legal justification for the work that we were doing simultaneously. So we were kind of like leaving breadcrumbs or marking the trail as we were doing the work. So when the audit comes, we can say, this is what we did and how we did it. It's all right there in the 3-ring binder.
I'm just curious on this. Have you seen a lot of people coming out with kind of these mobile processing units? And is that something you guys would work on?
Yeah, so that is something I think that is, I think there's going to be a true challenge there because you're talking about, some kind of a mobile clean industry out on the dirty range with weather and wind and other challenges that present there. But I think it's possible, and I think it's going to take some time to kind of perfect those techniques and those technologies. But I absolutely am hopeful and very positive that I think it's possible to perfect that so it can work. But there certainly are challenges with that today.
I feel like that's kind of an important thing because when you look at
how much weight a cow loses from stress being taken to a
Yeah.
facility. And then, animals like bison. We just filmed a farm up in Maine as they were loading up bison to take them. And, the farmers were kind of complaining about, for the animal and the way that they want to do it, it'd be a lot easier if they had access to mobile processing units instead of having to trailer the animal 2 hours across the state. And, it's kind of not the ending that they envisioned for an animal that they love, so.
I think Temple Grandin has led, kind of not just our country, but I think has kind of led a society in general to kind of more humane thinking about the animal. And I think we think about the animal, the wing, the fin, the four-legged and microbes and pollinators. I think that's some of Indian countries' indigenous and ecological knowledge. And I think that you combine those things with science and technology, and then you lay a good dose of economics on top of that. That hologram and that intersection starts to look pretty interesting. And again, I'm a very hopeful optimist that says, people and young people behind us will figure these things out as we migrate and evolve. But I think some of these things are going to take some time. And I think in terms of the mobile technologies, it does make sense. And it does make sense for people who are much smarter than I to try and work on those and figure those out. But again, it's all about food security, but you can't say food security without food safety. So we've got to be able to figure those two things out in combination. And it is possible for sure. I think there's really good and advanced technologies for figuring that out. But then you've got to think about the economics, and it's really about scale. So yeah, you can work mobile, I think, in a very safe way. And then you start thinking about scaling that to the scale where it makes economic sense and it makes sense for folks beyond boutique sized processing. So again, I think it is possible, and I think people will figure that out as we go. But I think we're in the middle of doing that on a real time basis right now.
But you just mentioned food security, and you also mentioned a few minutes ago that local food, regional food resources is making us more food secure. And last week, you and I talked a little bit about the difference between food sovereignty and food security. But so I wanted to get into that. But before I did, could you explain why local makes food security more secure?
Yeah, I think, when you start thinking about local, there's been a whole pre-COVID, there was a whole sensibility about local foods and food provenance and that kind of thing. I think there's in my mind, in my experience, there's a true connectivity between this man, this ground, that plant, that animal. And I think that, oftentimes, because of the increase of food allergies, we're all eating things, like maybe I should never taste an oyster or a lobster, right? Or wild rice. I'm here in the high desert plateau of New Mexico. And I think my DNA, my genealogy is closely tied to this land, this water, these plants, and these animals. And I think there's something really empowering and very, and it really gives my DNA a whole lot of strength in that. And I think that that's probably the way it was, and maybe that's the way it's going to be in the future as we talk about the globalization of food. I mean, there was a social anthropologist that came through here to the Southwest about maybe a dozen years ago and hit on one of the Pueblo tribes here. And they said, one of the questions they were asking was, how long could you and your family survive with food that you have stored?
Yeah.
And when they came to my cousin and they talked to my cousin about that, my cousin was telling me about that experience. And he said, I don't know, probably about 6 or 7 months. And the anthropologist said, there's no way that's possible. And my cousin said, are you calling me a liar? Come here and I'll show you. Walked out back and showed him dried jerky hanging from the roof, and then showed him in his the house that's outside in the storage area. Showed him corn that was stored. Showed him strings of red chili that was drying in the sun. And so all the sun-dried foodstuffs that we had stored, and showed them the freezer with the deer and the elk in there and green chili stuffed in there. And And the social anthropologist was just floored because he said most Americans really have a Hot Pocket or a L'Eggo My Eggo that goes to the microwave, and there's really nothing except for ketchup and a few condiments, maybe some cold beer in the refrigerator. But that's really, we've become, in our modern context, so tied to the drive-through for our food stuff that we really forget all about grandpa's drying and grandma's canning and jarring and things like that. There's just the local food, I think, is so important from a DNA perspective and from a supply chain perspective that I think COVID has really forced us to look at that importance and underscored that importance to us. So I think that all of us are tribal in a way, and all of us are indigenous in a way. We all have to go back to our grandmas and grandpas and figure out, how did they do this? And it's just, I think the answer is pretty simple. It's just a whole lot of hard work, and a whole lot of emphasis on sharing and caring about your neighbor. And I think that's where that regionalization and local foods comes from. And I think that it's beyond the economics, it's beyond the DNA and the science, it's beyond supply chain. I think it really is more getting to know your neighbor and neighbors and coming and sharing, whether it's at your local farmer market or, just kind of neighbor to neighbor. Hey, I've got some extra rhubarb, but do you have some extra milk? Let's just do a swap. And that's the way it was. That's the way society worked and was strengthened. And I think that has gotten us this far. And I think we're kind of getting away from that. Maybe it's time to start looking back at that and kind of going back to that.
What you just presented with the DNA was a perspective I hadn't heard before, but looking at it from an economics perspective, when you're buying local and you're strengthening your local farmers, which is making that food resource more available to you, and you're also recycling some of your resources back within your community, which I feel is important.
I was going to tell you something about the local thing. A couple of years ago, I bought a $60 pair of socks.
Oh yeah.
And I'm a pretty simple guy. I've got my jeans and my t-shirts and whatnot. And I did buy a $60 pair of socks because I was at this farmer's market. There was this Amish lady there, and she had a pair of socks, wool socks, that she had collected the wool, spun the wool, dyed it, cleaned it, and was able to fabricate these socks. And I looked at her and I said, "You're charging $60 for this pair of socks?" And she smiled at me and said, "Yes, I am." And I said, "How could you charge $60 for a pair of socks? I would never pay $60 for a pair of socks. Like what man's going to come by and buy these?" And she started explaining to me, Charlie, that it was the selling the $60 pair of socks was an act of cultural preservation, that she actually went through, collected the wool from the animals, cleaned it, spun it, all the kinds of things that it takes to do that. And she said that she put in the time to do all that, and she figured out it's a $60 pair of socks. Like, that would be the true cost of a pair of socks. When she told me the story, I understood. She didn't explicitly say this, but I understood that she was really talking about, we need to support, in modern time with modern dollar, that this is the true cost of things. And I bought those pair of socks not because I needed a $60 pair of socks. I don't think I've ever worn them. I think it was more the story and what we all need to contribute to, or otherwise we lose that. So I did buy that $60 pair of socks, and I bought it because it's cultural preservation, and she really told the story about what it took to do that. And I think that impressed me so much that I was the guy who bought the $60 pair of socks.
Well, there's some truth to that, though.
Yes.
A lot of subscribers on our channel will often make the comment, well, buying local is just way more expensive. Farmers are upcharging it just because it's local food and they can do that. But that's not true at all. They're barely making a profit on it just to be competitive, because the actual effort that goes into doing this stuff, especially on a smaller scale, is considerable. But it's kind of preserving the cultural side of that, as well as strengthening your community. And culture, I think, is a big part of community.
Absolutely. And Charlie, I think the cost of not paying $60 for the socks is we lost that. I mean, we no longer have people that are going to collect wool and do all the things it takes to actually make the pair of socks, right? We've lost that. So if we don't pay the $60 for the pair of socks, or we don't pay the true cost for meat and meat processing on a local basis, or the farmer, we all know what that looks like. It's a hot pocket and a L'Eggo My Eggo in a microwave. That's what it's going to be.
Yeah.
And I think if anybody wants to subscribe to that, I think there needs to be enough people who start to value the farmer and the rancher. And I think that we've got to be able to support that. And not that everybody should pay $60 for a pair of socks. Don't get me wrong, but I think it's the value. We have to value ourselves as humanity and say, what does it cost, and how can we support those that are doing that hard work, and then just do that, just support them. We don't have no, when you start thinking about where we're headed as mainstream America, and you think about, that $6 and now even $7 coffee, we think about that $5 gallon of gasoline, and we think about that $1.50 bottle of water. We have no problem paying for those kinds of things. We've been taught and trained that that's normal. We ought to do that. And I think we need to start normalizing supporting ourselves and our neighbors for really good, clean food.